I was 54 when I realized that love, in the way I thought it could be earned, was nothing more than a transaction I signed into like a long-term lease. People warned me, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that marrying a woman like Carla, a beautiful, younger single mother, meant I'd always be more provider than partner. But I told myself I wasn't naive. I thought I was practical. A man who builds quietly, keeps to himself, and makes sure the lights stay on. I didn't want worship. I just wanted someone to meet me halfway. I was comfortable in my solitude before I met them. Carla came in like warm light into a dim house, her daughter Lila tagging along with sharp eyes and sharper edges. Just 9 years old, and already looking at the world like it owed her something. But I saw potential. I told myself I could be a steady presence. A father figure, maybe even a husband she'd grow to love, not for my money, but for my loyalty. That hope became a home. That home became a life. And that life, eventually, turned into the kind of trap you only realize you're in when someone laughs at you in public like you're a clown they forgot to take off the leash. It was supposed to be a celebration. Lila had gotten a promotion at the tech firm she worked for. A mid-level product manager title she wore like a crown. She invited us to her company party. Rooftop cocktails, catered sushi, all the pretentious chatter of people trying too hard to impress each other. I stood next to Carla in my tailored blazer, smiling politely, sipping bourbon, letting the conversations flow around me like wind. Lila was glowing, her designer dress clinging to her frame, her smile bright and perfectly practiced. She held her wine glass like she was born to it, her laugh airy and effortless. When she walked us over to her boss and a few colleagues, I expected a basic introduction. This is my stepdad, or even just a name. Instead, she chuckled, gestured toward me, and said with a smirk, "This is the man my mom used to pay my bills. Definitely not my dad and can't be like him." Then she sipped her wine and laughed like it was just a harmless joke. I didn't laugh. I looked at her. Then I looked at Carla. And that was when the knife twisted. Carla laughed harder than anyone else. She threw her head back like Lila had just said the most clever thing she'd ever heard. Then, leaning close to me, she whispered in that half-drunk, smug voice I'd learned to ignore over the years. She didn't lie, you know. I never loved you. Just like that. Like it was a funny secret. Like I was in on the joke, too. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I don't even think I blinked. I just stood there, nodding slightly like I was considering a menu. Something broke inside me. Not loudly, not all at once, but in a quiet, steady snap, like dry wood splitting in cold air. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't throw a drink or raise my voice. I just smiled politely and excused myself to the restroom. I never came back to that party. That night, I sat in the dark in my office with the door locked and called my lawyer. I'd been paying him on retainer for years, partly out of habit, partly out of paranoia. "It's time," I told him. "Divorce. No negotiations." He didn't ask for details. He knew me well enough to know I wasn't the kind of man who made impulsive decisions. I told him I wanted the papers drawn up and delivered before sunrise. And they were. I didn't sleep. I made coffee. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, touching the furniture I bought, the kitchen appliances I installed, the light fixtures I personally selected to make Carla feel like she lived in a magazine. I stared at family photos, Lila's graduation picture, the family trip to Aruba, the Christmas morning with matching pajamas. All of it carefully curated to look like something we weren't. I saw it clearly now. I'd never been family. I'd been funding a lifestyle. By the time the sun rose, I had already set her clothes on the front lawn, hung neatly on garment racks, covered in plastic. Not thrown, not damaged, just removed. Carla found them when she stepped outside in her robe to get the paper. Her scream cracked the morning silence like glass. She ran back in, barefoot, slamming the door open. "What the hell is this, Mark?" she shouted, waving a silk blouse like a flag. "Are you serious right now?" I didn't shout back. I just handed her the manila envelope and said, "You have 30 days. My lawyer will handle the rest." She opened it, scanned the papers, and then her face dropped like she'd seen a ghost. "You're divorcing me?" Her voice shook now. "You're just ending this?" I nodded once. "You ended it last night. I'm just cleaning up." That's when the begging started. She followed me around the house like a lost child, crying, apologizing, saying she was drunk, that Lila was just trying to be funny. You know how she is, she pleaded. You know I didn't mean it. But I didn't stop moving. I unplugged her devices, gathered her paperwork, boxed up her toiletries. She tried to touch my arm. I stepped away. I gave you everything, I said finally, my voice lower than usual. And you gave me nothing but years of pretending. I'm done being a placeholder in my own damn life. Later that morning, I sat alone in the breakfast nook, sipping coffee while Carla sobbed upstairs. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. Just a strange calm, like the eye of a storm I'd spent years walking into. I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I still had one move left. One final thread to pull. Because what neither Carla nor Lila knew was that the company Lila worked for, the very company she proudly climbed up in, was one I held majority shares in. Through a quiet investment made 7 years ago, I had become the silent hand behind the curtain. I had watched her career bloom, her arrogance grow, her contempt deepen. And now, I was going to take it all back. The hardest part of walking away wasn't the silence. It was how easy that silence settled in once they were gone. The house didn't feel haunted by memories or filled with echoes of laughter. No, it felt like something had been removed. Like a tumor cut out clean. There was a peace to it, unsettling at first, but soon it felt deserved. I stood in the hallway that morning, watching Carla drag a suitcase across the hardwood floor, her face blotchy and her pride unraveling by the minute. She had spent the last few hours bouncing between fury and desperation, screaming into pillows, then collapsing into tears, then hurling insults like darts hoping one would stick. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say much of anything. After years of bending, I'd finally gone still, and I could tell it terrified her. There had always been a certain rhythm to our life, one I didn't even realize I was dancing to until I stopped. Carla would complain, and I'd solve the problem. Lila would make a snide remark, and I'd laugh it off, pretend it didn't sting. Every holiday, every dinner, every gift was a transaction that I funded with the hope of eventual closeness. But the truth is, I was a customer at my own table, tipping generously for the illusion of family. I remember one Christmas, I bought Lila a new car. Not a fancy one, just something safe, reliable, modern. She opened the keys, looked at the box, and said, "Cool. Thanks, I guess," like I'd handed her socks. Carla didn't say anything, didn't nudge her, didn't acknowledge the effort. And I just smiled and poured more wine because that was my role. Make it look smooth, even if it cut going down. That morning, as Carla stood in the doorway with her overnight bag and her pride shattered at her feet, she gave one last effort. "You're really going to throw away 17 years like it was nothing?" she asked, voice cracked, mascara bleeding into her cheeks. I looked at her, not with hatred, not even with sadness. Just clarity. "You threw it away the moment you told me I was never loved." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I stepped aside, opened the door, and held it for her. 30 days. After that, everything's locked. She stepped out without another word. The moment the door clicked shut, I locked it. Not just physically, emotionally, spiritually. I wasn't bitter, I was clean. I spent the rest of that day taking inventory. Not just of assets, but of moments. I sat down with a yellow legal pad and wrote down every instance I could recall where I was minimized, ignored, used. I didn't do it to wallow. I did it to confirm what my heart already knew. This wasn't a marriage. It was a lease agreement. And I'd been the one footing the rent, utilities, and maintenance while they trashed the place with entitlement and disdain. I read through the list twice, then burned it in the fireplace. Some things don't need to be revisited. They just need to be released. Later that evening, I called my lawyer again. Make sure the prenup holds. And I want her off every joint account by end of week. He didn't ask questions, just said, "Already in motion." I appreciated that. For once, someone taking my side without needing justification. Carla had signed that prenup all those years ago because she assumed she'd never need to worry about it. I wasn't the kind of man who would ever walk away. That's what they both thought. That I was too old, too tired, too comfortable to ever choose myself. They confused patience with weakness. It was a fatal miscalculation. That night, the house was quiet. Not a peaceful quiet. More like the sound of tension evacuating a room. I poured myself a drink and sat in the den, looking out the window at the garden I'd spent hours maintaining over the years. Carla never touched it. Lila used to call it Dad's little therapy project. I remember overhearing that once during a Zoom call she was on with friends. She didn't know I was in the next room. They laughed. I stood there, watering can in hand, listening like I was eavesdropping on my own life. I don't know what hurt more, that she called me Dad in sarcasm, or that she mocked what I'd built just to keep my sanity intact. The next morning, I woke up alone in the bed that had always felt more like a guest room than a sanctuary. I stretched, got dressed, and went about my day like nothing had changed, because deep down, nothing had changed. The real change had happened years ago, slowly, quietly, without ceremony. This was just the paperwork catching up to the truth. I went to my office, handled some investments, made a few calls. One of them was to a board member of the tech company Lila worked for. We chatted like old friends. He owed me favors. Big ones. I told him it was time to cash in. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring the balance. She had mocked me in front of her colleagues, reducing me to a punchline in a room where I had more power than she ever knew. She wanted to remind the room that I wasn't her father. I planned to remind her that I wasn't powerless. That evening, I wrote an email, brief, surgical, emotionless. I instructed the board to initiate a departmental restructuring that would eliminate Lila's position entirely. I knew she'd assume it was a budget cut or internal politics. But I also knew she'd eventually learn who really signed the check that got her escorted out. By the time Carla tried to call again, I had already changed my number. She emailed. I didn't respond. Lila sent a text with a single word, "Really?" I didn't reply. There was nothing left to explain. I didn't need closure from them. I had found it the moment I stopped trying to be accepted. The moment I realized that peace isn't always soft or quiet. Sometimes peace is a locked door, a cleared account, a name removed from a deed. Sometimes peace is a man in his mid-50s sitting in his garden, alone, free, and finally off the payroll. There's a particular kind of satisfaction that comes not from vengeance, but from control, the quiet kind that settles over you when you know, beyond any doubt, that the people who thought they were dancing circles around you are about to realize you've been standing still for years, watching. I'd always kept my financial ties discreet. There were no plaques with my name on them, no public press releases tying me to the companies I invested in. That was intentional. I liked being the man no one noticed, the man whose signature controlled budgets, whose silent votes tipped boardroom decisions. Lila, in her arrogance, thought her job came from talent. In truth, it came from proximity to my wallet. She was promoted because I whispered approval behind closed doors, not because she had earned it. And now, she was about to learn what it felt like when the hand holding you up suddenly lets go. The company was a promising tech firm I'd bought into 7 years earlier, before they had a product, before their name meant anything outside of a PowerPoint pitch deck. I saw potential. I also saw an opportunity to offer Lila a place where she could grow without realizing how deeply the soil had been fertilized by me. I didn't want credit. I wanted connection. I wanted her to succeed and maybe, just maybe, look back and think, he really was there for me. But what I got instead was a daughter in name only who treated my kindness like an allowance and my presence like a necessary background prop for family photos. So I decided to pull my strings, not in anger, but in necessity. It was time to stop funding people who saw me as expendable. The boardroom was glass-walled and sterile, nestled on the top floor of a building I helped purchase through a holding company with a deliberately generic name. I flew in early, unannounced, dressed in one of my quieter suits. Nothing flashy, just efficient. The same way I'd been for most of my life. Only 3 of the 7 board members knew I was coming. The others were surprised when I entered, which I preferred. It set the tone. No smiles. No handshakes. Just nods and raised eyebrows. "Gentlemen," I said, calmly taking a seat at the head of the table, "we need to restructure our product management division." Effective immediately. There were objections, of course. One board member asked if this was personal. "Everything's personal when you've written the checks," I replied. That shut him up. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just laid out the numbers, how the department had ballooned in budget, how Lila's last 3 initiatives were underperforming, how her team was losing confidence. All of it true. I'd made sure I had receipts. When the vote was taken, it passed with a narrow majority. 2 abstained. 3 voted with me. The motion carried. Lila's position, and several others, were dissolved by 5 p.m. that day. I left the meeting without a word, stepping into the elevator with the calm detachment of someone who'd just finished spring cleaning. By the time I reached the ground floor, I received the first call. Lila. I let it ring. The second call came 5 minutes later, her voice this time, trembling on voicemail. I just got let go. What the hell is happening? Was this you? Did you really? She didn't finish the thought, just ended the message in a mix of disbelief and rising panic. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd already heard every variation of her voice. Arrogant, dismissive, sarcastic, but never one that said thank you. Not once in 17 years. I wasn't about to sit through another lecture where I played villain just because I finally enforced a boundary. Later that night, Carla sent an email. Short, passive-aggressive. She didn't deserve this. You've made your point. That was all she wrote. No apology. No insight. Just the typical deflection. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured a glass of wine and stood in the study, staring at the wall of books I'd built by hand one summer when they were away in Europe. They never asked me to. I just wanted to surprise them. Lila didn't even notice. Carla said it made the room feel too old. Everything I gave was either invisible or inappropriate. So I stopped giving. Word spread faster than I anticipated. A former colleague of Lila's, someone she once bragged about putting in their place, emailed me anonymously. I heard what happened. She's been cruel to so many people. We all saw it, but no one thought she'd ever face consequences. Another message came through LinkedIn from a junior team member. Thank you. 2 words that hit me harder than they should have. It made me realize just how much I'd been shielding her from the reality of her own behavior. Carly used to say I was too soft. She was wrong. I was too loyal. There's a difference. I expected Carla to try harder, but she didn't. Not really. Her pride was too bruised to show up at my door, and her ego too large to apologize sincerely. Instead, she sent little breadcrumbs of guilt. Photos of old vacations. Screenshots of birthday cards Lila had given me when she was 12. Remember this one? She wrote under a picture of us on a beach, both of them in white, me holding the camera. I remember that day well. They fought the entire morning over nothing. I paid for the trip, took the photo, smiled through it. I had nothing else to say. In the days that followed, my home grew quieter, but never lonelier. There's a difference between being alone and being unburdened. I didn't miss the half-hearted conversations or the dinner table awkwardness. I didn't miss being talked over, dismissed, or corrected for things I supposedly never understood. What I missed, if anything, was the version of myself I used to be, the man who still believed effort could breed affection. That man was gone now. And I wasn't mourning him. I was glad to have outlived him. That Sunday, I went to my garden, the one they used to joke about. I trimmed the hedges, pulled weeds, laid new mulch. It was the first time in years I felt fully present doing it. No thoughts about what gift I should buy next. No worries about planning another family dinner. Just the sun, the soil, and the quiet hum of a life no longer dictated by people who mistook love for leverage. I felt something I hadn't in years, free. It didn't take long for the fallout to start trickling in. Not from Lila or Carla, but from the periphery, the ones who'd been orbiting our lives like flies around sugar, too quiet to speak up when things were good, but suddenly loud when things went sour. Within a week, my phone started lighting up with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Carla's sister, Denise, sent a 3-paragraph monologue about how I'd devastated a young woman's career and overreacted to a harmless joke. She even had the nerve to say, "You were like a father to her. You should have been proud of her progress." Proud. That word sat in my mouth like acid. Proud of what? Her condescension? Her public mockery? Her ability to build a career on connections I gave her and gratitude she never expressed? I didn't reply. I deleted it. But I didn't forget it. Then came the social media shade. I wasn't on Instagram, but mutual acquaintances started sending me screenshots of Carla's vague posts. People show their true colors when you stop feeding their ego. Or Lila's snarky tweet. Funny how men think money makes them important. Your money didn't raise me. My mom did. Comments filled with fire emojis and "Yas Queen" gifts from women who didn't know half the story. They called me bitter, controlling, cold. No one asked why I'd done what I did. No one thought to wonder why a man would walk away after nearly 20 years of being the dependable one. They just assumed. Because silence, I've learned, makes a better villain than any confession ever could. Still, I kept quiet. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Because people closer to the ground started speaking. Carla's old friend, Maria, the one who used to tag along on vacations and drink wine on my patio, sent me a voice message late one night. "Mark, I hope you're okay. I just wanted to say, I always thought you were too good for Carla. She used to laugh about how easily she could get you to say yes to anything. I don't know why I never said anything back then. I guess I didn't want to get involved." Her voice cracked a little at the end. Guilt, maybe. Or cowardice catching up. But it was something. And it confirmed what I'd long suspected. My generosity had never earned me respect. It had only made me easier to exploit. There was one moment that hit me harder than the rest. Lila's ex-boyfriend, Alex, a polite young man I always liked, sent me an email. Subject line, "Sorry." The body was simple. Just a paragraph. "I always respected you. Lila used to talk about how clueless you were, but I thought you were the only decent one in that house. I never said anything because, well, it wasn't my place. But I'm glad you stood up for yourself. You deserved better." That message sat in my inbox for days before I could reread it. Because that one, felt like the truth finally knocking on my door after years of being ignored. I began noticing things differently after that. Going through old photos, I could see now what I'd ignored back then. Carla's tight smiles, the way she leaned away from me in pictures, always placing Lila in the middle like a buffer. In candid shots, they were always laughing with each other, never with me. I was there, in the frame, but never in the moment. I remembered birthdays where I was the one cooking, cleaning, organizing, while they treated me like a caterer. I remembered Lila's graduation dinner where she toasted to her real support system and thanked her mom's unwavering love. I paid for the dinner. I booked the venue. I bought the dress. But apparently, that didn't count. And yet, despite everything, people kept telling me I was overreacting, that I should have forgiven, that families fight, that jokes shouldn't end relationships. As if this was a single insult, not the final crack in a dam I'd spent years patching with patience and denial. What they didn't understand, what they refused to understand, was that I didn't leave over one comment. I left because that comment exposed the entire truth. It pulled back the curtain and showed me exactly where I stood, not as a father figure, not as a husband, but as a utility. I had outlived my usefulness. That's why the betrayal didn't come with rage. It came with a kind of quiet grief. Like mourning someone who was never really there to begin with. The hardest part was realizing how long I'd been performing. How much of myself I had edited just to keep the peace. Carla liked silence in the mornings, so I stopped playing music. Lila hated dad jokes, so I stopped telling them. I remember once bringing home a rare bottle of wine I thought Carla would love. She looked at the label, raised an eyebrow, and said, "That's not really my taste." No thank you. No curiosity. Just a dismissal. And I poured a glass anyway, drinking it alone at the table, pretending it was fine. Pretending I didn't feel invisible. I started calling that time in my life the performance years. Because that's what it was, an act. I played the part of the stable provider, the stepfather, the agreeable husband. I wore it well. But behind the curtain, I was always waiting for someone to notice the effort. No one ever did. Until I left. Then suddenly, I became visible. Not in gratitude, but in outrage. How dare the prop walk off stage in the middle of their show? Eventually, the noise started to die down. The text slowed. The subtweet stopped. People got bored. That's the thing about outrage. It burns hot and fast, but it never lasts. And when it faded, what remained was clarity. No more justifying myself to people who never bothered to ask how I was doing. No more over-explaining decisions I made for my peace. I stopped answering the door. I stopped replying to messages. I started reading again, walking again, breathing again. And for the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes to see what mood my household was in. The house was mine now. The mood was mine too. Then one day, a package arrived. No name on the sender. Inside was a framed photo from that rooftop party. The last photo we ever took together. Me standing awkwardly beside Lila and Carla, both mid-laugh, both looking in the other direction. I stared at it for a long time before flipping it over. On the back, in Carla's handwriting, was a single sentence. "We didn't mean to lose you." I stared at it, emotionless. Because the truth was, they never had me. Not really. And what you never truly have, you don't get to mourn when it's gone. It took weeks before I could walk through the house without pausing in doorways, waiting for voices that would never come. Not because I missed them, I didn't. But because silence has a way of making you confront things you used to step over. For years, I treated this house like a canvas for their comfort. Every upgrade, every piece of furniture, every damn decorative pillow was chosen with their preferences in mind. The kitchen, Carla's dream layout. The upstairs guest room, renovated twice to match Lila's aesthetic. Even the color of the front door was chosen because Lila said it made the house look less like an old man lived here. I remembered nodding, smiling, and paying for the paint, like a damn sponsor trying to earn airtime on a channel that never featured me. I spent a Saturday morning pulling everything out of the closets. Not just the clothes Carla left behind or the boxes of old shoes Lila never took with her. I mean everything. The towels they insisted on buying in 3 different shades of beige. The mismatched plates they found cute at some overpriced home boutique. Even the heavy curtains that blocked the morning light, gone. I ripped them down, opened every window, and let the air crawl through the house like it had been waiting to exhale. I wanted this place to breathe again. I wanted me to breathe again. And it's strange how satisfying it felt to see empty shelves. There was no longer any pretending. The museum of their preferences had finally closed. I didn't rush to replace things. That's not the point of cleansing. It wasn't about putting in new stuff. It was about rediscovering what I actually liked, without having to accommodate someone else's criticism or correction. I started simple, one room at a time. The office came first. I rearranged the books in a way that made sense to me, not by color or size, but by memory. I moved my reading chair closer to the window. I brought in a record player and dusted off old jazz records I hadn't touched in years because Carla said they gave her a headache. And I listened to every one of them, loud and clear. The sound didn't just fill the room, it filled me. It reminded me of who I was before I let 2 people convince me that I was only valuable in silence. Eventually, I made my way to the bedroom. That was the hardest room. Not because I missed the intimacy, it had been absent for years. But because the bed, the decor, the whole setup, it felt like a shrine to a relationship that never really existed. I stood there for a while, arms crossed, staring at the bedspread she picked, the wall art she loved, the candles she never lit. I remembered the nights I slept on the very edge of that mattress, quiet as possible so I wouldn't disturb her. I remembered the time she told me I sighed too loudly in my sleep. And I remembered laughing at myself, quietly, wondering how I ever thought this was love. That night, I stripped the bed bare, took down the wall art, and carried it all to the garage. I slept on the couch with a blanket and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The next day, I started cleaning out the attic. Boxes of old photos, yearbooks, and letters, most of them Carla's or Lila's. I found a photo album labeled Family Memories. I flipped through it slowly. There were trips I paid for, birthdays I planned, holidays I hosted. In nearly every photo, I was either holding the camera or standing awkwardly to the side. The captions were telling. Lila's big day, girls' trip to Mexico, Mom and Lila before prom. I was there. I funded all of it. But I was always absent in the retelling. Just a silhouette in someone else's story. A convenient presence, not a cherished one. I closed the album and set it aside. Not out of anger. Out of understanding. Sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is stop trying to prove your place in someone else's narrative. There was one photo, though, that stopped me. It was a candid shot. Must have been taken by someone else. I was sitting in the backyard, covered in dirt, planting roses in the garden bed. Carla was in the background, on the phone, looking irritated. Lila wasn't even in the frame. The flowers were blooming, sunlight on my back, and I was smiling, really smiling. I held that photo for a long time. That was my moment, not theirs. And for once, I didn't need anyone else in the frame to validate it. I kept that one, framed it, put it in the study next to my record player. Because that day wasn't about them. It was about me doing something I loved, unbothered, uncorrected, and completely myself. One afternoon, I found Lila's high school journal tucked in a box of her old notebooks. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe I wanted to understand her. Maybe I thought I'd find some entry where she called me dad, said she loved me, said I meant something. But what I found instead were pages of complaints. Mark is so weird. He always wants to bond. Ugh. I can't wait until I can move out and stop pretending. I closed it quickly, heart thudding. Not from pain. From closure. Because that's what truth does. It stings first, but then it releases you. I didn't need to wonder anymore. I didn't need to hope she'd come around. She never saw me as family. Not even close. And that was okay. Because I was finally starting to see myself clearly again. I ended the day by sitting on the back porch, staring out at the garden, the one they laughed at, called my old man hobby. It was flourishing. Roses, lavender, mint, and marigold. I ran my fingers over the petals, feeling the texture of life I'd nurtured quietly, alone. I thought about all the things I gave up over the years, small things, subtle things. The way I stopped humming while I cooked. The way I stopped watching old westerns because Lila said they were boomer garbage. The way I learned to smile through dismissal. And now, sitting there in the quiet, I realized something important. Every compromise I made for them chipped away at the man I used to be. And it was my job to put him back together. That night, I slept in the freshly cleaned bedroom with white sheets I picked out myself. No decorations. No candles. Just space. Clean, honest mine. I lay on my back, hands behind my head, no one beside me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt right. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their presence. I didn't even need their apology. What I needed, what I finally had, was peace. And not the kind you beg for. The kind you build when you finally stop giving the best of yourself to people who only know how to take. It was a Sunday afternoon when Carla's email came. The subject line read, "Just a thought." That was her tone. Always. Disarming. Casual. As if decades of manipulation could be smoothed over with a soft phrase and a wink of nostalgia. I stared at it in my inbox for a while before clicking. The body of the email was short, but packed with the kind of selective memory that made me wonder if we had lived in the same house at all. Hey, I've been thinking about everything. We had some good years, didn't we? Things got complicated, sure, but I know deep down you loved us. And I think a part of you still does. Lila's going through a hard time. She didn't mean what she said at the party. She's young. You know how girls can be. Anyway, I hope you're doing okay. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No apology. No ownership. Just a rewritten history where the villain wore my face, and the victims were the ones who laughed at me in front of a room full of strangers. I didn't reply. Not right away. Not because I didn't have words, but because I wanted to sit with my silence and decide what it meant to respond with clarity, not emotion. I'd spent too much of my life being reactive, patching over insults with generosity, answering disrespect with understanding. I wanted to be deliberate this time. So I poured myself a drink, walked into the study, sat by the window, and thought about what I would have said a year ago. Something conciliatory, probably. Something like, "I know things got messy, but I still care about you both." I'd have tried to make peace, even if it meant giving up a piece of myself to do it. But that man was gone, and the one who sat here now didn't need their understanding. He had his own. Later that evening, I opened a blank reply and typed only one sentence. "I'm not your husband, and I'm not her father." Then I clicked send. I didn't reread it. I didn't wait for a response. It was the cleanest thing I'd ever written, precise, true, and final. I shut the laptop and leaned back in my chair, letting the stillness wrap around me like a warm coat. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It was a boundary, and boundaries are only cruel to those who benefit from you having none. The next morning, I drove into town to meet with a woman named Evelyn. She ran a small foundation I had quietly donated to for years, one that provided housing, scholarships, and resources for single mothers trying to rebuild their lives. I sat across from her in a sunlit office filled with photos of smiling families and success stories. "I want to do more," I told her. Not in my name. Quietly. Anonymously. I've spent too much of my life giving to people who never saw me. I want to give to people who actually need it. She looked at me for a long moment, nodded slowly, then reached for her notepad. We can do that, she said. And thank you for showing up in a real way. That phrase stuck with me, showing up in a real way. That's all I ever wanted. To be seen, not for what I could give, but for who I was when I gave it. Later that week, I signed the final divorce documents. The house, by my choice, remained mine. Carla fought for it, but the prenup held. And while she left with enough to start over comfortably, she didn't get the prize she thought she was entitled to: my continued support, my quiet presence, my compliance. The lawyers did their job cleanly. No drama. Just signatures. Just paper. But as I sat in that office, watching the ink dry, I realized this wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the end of an illusion, that I was ever anything more than a placeholder in someone else's fantasy of upward mobility. One evening, a letter arrived. Handwritten. I recognized the penmanship immediately: Lila's. I held it in my hands for several minutes before opening it. Inside, the words were carefully chosen, heavy with effort. I don't know what to say, she began. I messed up. I didn't realize how much you did until it was gone. I thought you'd always be there. I know I hurt you. I didn't mean to. I was stupid and entitled, and I took you for granted. You didn't deserve that. I hope one day you can forgive me. If not, I understand. Just thank you for everything. I read it twice. There was no manipulation in the words, no deflection, just accountability. And that, in itself, was more than I ever expected. I didn't write back, not because I was angry, but because sometimes closure doesn't require conversation. Sometimes it's enough to know they finally saw you, even if only in hindsight. I placed the letter in a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a document of change. She would be okay, maybe even better for it, and I would be too. Autumn rolled in, and the house transformed with the season. I bought new curtains, linen, light, the kind that let in morning sun. I painted the door navy blue, not to hide the past, but to mark the beginning of something new. I planted new roses in the garden and started hosting quiet dinners for old friends. People who remembered my birthday. People who asked how I was doing, not what I could do for them. I laughed more, slept better, cooked meals without rushing to accommodate someone else's palate. I was living, not in spite of the past, but because I had finally stepped beyond it. Some days, I thought about them, Carla and Lila. Not with longing, but with curiosity. I wondered if they ever talked about me now, if they ever looked around and felt the absence of something they used to treat as guaranteed. I hoped they were growing, learning, evolving. I didn't need them to fail. I just needed them to know they couldn't keep me on the shelf like a loyal tool, ready when needed, silent when dismissed. I had once loved them in my own quiet way, and perhaps that's why it took me so long to walk away. But I had, and that walk was the most important journey I'd ever taken. On the 1-year anniversary of the rooftop party, the night that broke it all, I poured a glass of wine, stepped out into the garden, and toasted to the life I'd reclaimed. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't bitter. I was whole. And in the silence of that moment, surrounded by roses I had planted with my own hands, I knew the truth that had taken me years to understand. I wasn't her husband. I wasn't her father. I was a man who had finally learned that peace doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from refusing to accept anything less than the respect you deserve. If you've ever given your heart, your time, or your resources to people who only saw your value when it served them, this story is your reminder. Choosing peace isn't petty. It's powerful. Walking away isn't weakness. It's self-respect. You deserve to be seen, not just used. If this hit home for you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories.